Hi guys, welcome back. We are currently reading The Barren Grounds by David A. Robertson, and we are on chapter 21, page 194. Okay. So they're on their way. They can see where they need to go to find the man and hopefully the summer birds, but they've realized there's no game around them. There's nothing to hunt to eat. There are no animals. This is a big concern. There should be an abundance of animals where they are. Okay? Nochek thinks it is because the human, again, was being too greedy. And he kind of got a little bit frustrated actually with Eli and Morgan, and he said, you humans, this is what happens. You're too greedy. You want more and you want more and you want more, and you take everything. And they said, well, that's not us. And then Ochek did some reflection and he said, you're right. You know, the other humans that did come through the portal to Mizwa were indigenous, like Morgan and Eli. However, the human that took the summer birds is not indigenous and is struggling, I guess, with greed and the actions and, consequences of that. So Ochek does believe that Eli and Morgan are there to help. Chapter 21, page 194. With the sun beginning its descent, the lake was like a sheet of glass and mirrored the sky overhead. Blue had been replaced with the fiery hues of autumn. Deep reds and oranges and yellows rolled over the water and waves. Across the water, at the center of the lake, was the island, and on it, the house. There was a canoe docked on the island shore, paddles resting on the ground beside it, and a brilliant light was emitted from within the dwelling. A rack for smoking meat outside the entrance to the house, not unlike the ones in Mizwa, but poorly constructed, was empty. The man, it seemed, wasn't immune to the lack of game. So he doesn't have any food either. It's good that we've come now, Ochek said. The group was at the shore, looking out over the water and towards the house. Soon the man will move on if there is nothing left to eat here. He will move on until there's nowhere left to move on to. I'd say, if that's the case, this is something we're doing not just for Mizwa, but for all of Eskai, Eric said. And that sounds true. If the man just keeps moving and moving, finding places where there is game and abundance, and then using up, being so greedy that all that is gone, soon all of Eskai will have no game. No pressure, Ochek said. Morgan and Eli exchanged a surprised look. Morgan wasn't sure if she'd actually heard what she thought she had. Ochek, did you just make a joke? She asked. You children must be rubbing off on me. Ochek took a step into the lake. Now remember, swim with your heads just above the water. It's getting dark enough that if he looks out, he may not see us. And if he sees us? Eli asked. We're sitting Sissipak, Eric said. That means ducks. Morgan beat Eli to the translation this time. Sitting ducks. They waded into the lake, leaving their packs on the shore, and the children in particular were pleased that the water was warm. Morgan recalled the first week she'd been placed with Katie and James. Before school started, they'd taken her out to Grand Beach, about an hour outside of Winnipeg. The beach stretched endlessly along the water, and the sand was white and soft and hot. But the water wasn't. Near the end of summer, the lake still felt terribly cold, and it took several minutes before her body adjusted to the temperature. She wasn't sure if it ever did, but this was like swimming in a lukewarm bathtub water, the kind of warmth you get after you've been sitting in the tub for an hour. It made the swim as pleasant as it could be, given the circumstances. They swam with their noses above the water, and sometimes with their noses below the water, after big gulps of air. If the man looked out from the window, he might see something that looked more like driftwood than animals and human beings. This was especially important now, seeing as how his meat rack was empty and the game was scarce or absent entirely in this area of the North Country. Morgan worried that he might make like Ochek and try to eat one of his own. It wasn't far from the land to the island, but the journey was long nonetheless, because they were all dog paddling, trying their best not to disturb the water or rise too far above the surface. Eventually, they came to the island and emerged from the water under cover behind the canoe. There had been no movement from within the cabin, just the light and heat showering out of it. They remained behind the canoe, their backs against the hull, out of sight from the cabin, just in case the man happened to look out the window. "Eric," Ochek whispered, "go and peek inside the cabin, very quietly." "Duh," Eric whispered back. She crawled across the grass on all fours towards the house. They watched as she positioned herself underneath the window, then slowly rose up until she was just high enough to see inside. Suddenly, she collapsed onto all fours and scurried back over to the canoe. "The birds are in a sack hanging from the ceiling," Eric reported. "Tatiku, the trader crane, is perched at the foot of the man's bed, right under the sack, warm and happy as a clam." "Wait, perched?" Morgan tried to think if Oho had been perched. They were kind of sitting in the council hut, more than perched, but still very owl-like. "Isn't Tatiku a being like you two are? Why isn't he, sitting in a chair or something? How does it work with birds?" Penisisak that can talk are mostly just like Penisisak that can't, Eric explained. So Penisisak are birds. Okay, so birds that can talk are very similar to birds that can't talk. "Or else they couldn't fly, I'd think," Ochek added. "Yeah, they'd be much too big," Eric said. Okay, so it sounds like birds, even if they're able to talk, are still very similar to birds that can't talk, probably in size, the way that they hold themselves, they're perching, they're not sitting in chairs, they're not standing upright. So they're very similar to birds that can't talk. "Yes, they'd be much too big," Eric said. "I think the only difference would be that they have these." Eric made her paw into weird claw-like shape. "Feathery fingers. Honestly, they're kind of weird, but they can grab things anyway." "Oho always has the cane with them," Ochek said. "Right," Eric said. "It's funny that they can probably fly perfectly fine, but they need a cane to walk." So they can fly like regular birds, and they can walk, but it's hard for them. So Oho, the owl, back in Mizwa on council, when they walk, they use a cane. Okay? I find it interesting. Oho goes by a non-binary term, they. Not she, not he, they. Okay? "They don't fly much, but you're right. I suspect when the white time is over, they'll fly out of joy," Ochek said. "All right, so Tatiku's perched. I get it," Morgan said. "You guys kind of over-explained that." "Hey, you're the one that needs to know everything, Equesis," Eric said, "according to your dear brother." "I mean, she has a point," Eli said. "You do need to know everything." That's true about Morgan. That's one of her characteristics. She asks a lot of questions. She wants to know things. She wants to understand. "Gang up on the curious girl, why don't you?" Morgan said. "And the man?" Ochek asked, trying to steer the conversation back on track. "What is he doing?" Eric cleared her throat. "Sleeping." "Good. Ochek scanned the group one by one with fierce determination. A sack, you say? Yes, like the empty one you had when you tried to kill me, Eric explained. Thanks for reminding me. Ochek rolled his eyes. The summer birds being in a sack makes things easier, actually. What do we do? Morgan watched as Ochek's black eyes darted back and forth. Okay, he whispered. I have a plan. The other three leaned in, and Ochek went over each of their roles in retrieving the summer birds from the cabin. They broke off and took their positions. Eli, with great caution, pushed the canoe into the water, placed the paddles inside the vessel, and held it in place, ready for their escape. Eric crept along the shoreline until she was right out in the open, and she waited there. Ochek and Morgan ducked low, crossed over the grass, and stopped underneath the window. Ochek handed Morgan a thin strip of fabric he'd torn from his clothing and made into a slip knot. Ready, Aquesis? She gripped the fabric in her fist. Ready. Ochek nodded at Eli, then at Eric. Seeing the signal, Eli got into the canoe and angled it to face northeast, away from the dying sun, towards Mizwa. Once Eli was set and keeping the canoe aimed properly with one of its paddles, Eric got to her feet, cupped her mouth, and started making psst sounds towards the house, doing her best to get Tatiku's attention while trying not to wake the man. She's trying to get the crane's attention. It worked. There was rustling inside the dwelling. It was Tatiku flapping his wings, moving from his spot at the foot of the bed to the window. What's going on out here? As soon as he appeared in the window, poking his head out into the open, Ochek reached up and grabbed his beak, holding it shut so that Tatiku couldn't alert the man to their presence. Quickly, Ochek whispered. Morgan put the knot over Tatiku's beak and pulled, forcing it to stay shut. Ochek yanked the crane out of the window. Once in the air, Tatiku kept flying away from the island and out across the water, pulling at the string with his feather fingers on the way in an attempt to get the slip knot off. With Tatiku gone, Morgan locked her fingers together to boost Ochek up. Once he was on the windowsill, she signaled to Eric, who ran to the canoe and jumped inside. Both she and Eli were ready for a clean getaway. Morgan turned back to the window to watch Ochek, who had lowered himself carefully inside and tiptoed across the floor. The man was sleeping in a chair, turned away from Ochek and her, his bald head slumped to one side, snoring loudly with every inhalation. The bag, which looked very much like a burlap sack, hung from the ceiling like a chandelier, with a million tiny shafts of light shooting from it. To reach the bag, Ochek needed to stand on the foot of the man's bed. He slid his knife out from his belt and began to saw at the twine in agonizingly slow lashes. To keep his balance, because each sawing motion threw him off, he shifted his feet. And each time he shifted his feet, the bed creaked. Over the man snoring, the creaks weren't all that loud, but Morgan found herself gripping the windowsill so tightly that her knuckles were white. When the job was almost done, Ochek's foot slipped, and he stumbled, and the creaks that followed, one after the other, were like thunder. Okay, we're going to leave this chapter here. I'll follow up with part 2. Bye, guys.